Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Call That Changed Everything. Derek Morrison was reviewing quarterly reports in his downtown law office when the phone rang. 23 years of criminal defense work had taught him to recognize when something was seriously wrong, and the tension in the officer's voice immediately put him on alert. Mr. Morrison, this is Detective Rodriguez with Metro Police. We found your 3-year-old son. Please come pick him up. Derek's pen stopped mid-signature. I'm sorry, there's been a mistake. I don't have a child. Sir, please just come down to the station. The child has your last name, and we need to sort this out. Precinct 14 on 5th Street. The drive downtown felt surreal. Derek Morrison, 45, had built his reputation on being unshakable in court. But this phone call had rattled him. He'd been married to Lindsay for 8 years, and they'd never had children. She'd always claimed she wasn't ready, that her career as a real estate agent was too demanding. They'd had arguments about it, but eventually he'd accepted her position. The police station buzzing with afternoon activity. Derek approached the front desk, his expensive suit drawing the usual respectful nods from officers who recognized him from courtrooms across the city. I'm Derek Morrison. Someone called about a child. Detective Rodriguez, a weathered man in his 50s, led him down a hallway to a small room with toys scattered across the floor. The boy was found wandering alone in Riverside Park. No identification, but he kept saying his last name was Morrison and that his daddy worked in the big building with all the cars. Derek's blood ran cold. That was how Lindsay always described his office building. It sat above a parking garage downtown. When we ran the name Morrison in our system, you came up. The description the boy gave of his father, well, it matches you pretty closely. They reached the room, and Rodriguez opened the door. Derek stepped inside and froze. Standing there was a small boy with dark hair and blue eyes, Derek's eyes. The child looked up at him with a mixture of fear and hope that made Derek's chest tighten. The resemblance was unmistakable. This was his son. Daddy, the boy said quietly. Derek knelt down, his mind racing. What's your name, son? Mason. Mason Morrison. Mommy said you were always working, but that you loved me very much. The room spun. Derek forced himself to remain calm, a skill honed from years of handling devastating evidence in court. Where's your mommy, Mason? She went to see Uncle Troy. She said she'd be back soon, but I got scared and went looking for you. Uncle Troy. Derek knew exactly who that was. Troy Castellano, Lindsay's former high school boyfriend who'd moved back to town 2 years ago. The same Troy who'd been calling the house recently, always with some excuse about catching up. The same Troy that Lindsay had been showing houses to for months. Derek's jaw clenched. Everything clicked into place with brutal clarity. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the way Lindsay had been distant lately. She'd been living a double life, and apparently, she'd been raising his son with another man. Detective Rodriguez, Derek said, standing slowly. I'll need to make some arrangements. Can someone watch Mason for a few hours while I sort things out? Of course. But sir, we'll need to contact the mother. Do you have her information? Derek pulled out his phone, staring at his wife's contact information. His wife, who'd been lying to him for over 3 years. Who'd hidden his own son from him. Who'd been playing house with her lover while Derek worked 60-hour weeks to support the lifestyle she demanded. I'll handle contacting her, Derek said, his voice deadly calm. Trust me, detective. I'll handle everything. As he looked down at Mason, who was clutching a small toy car, Derek felt something cold and calculating settle into his chest. He'd built his career destroying people who thought they could outsmart the system. Now, he was going to turn those skills on the two people who'd betrayed him most deeply. Lindsay and Troy had no idea what was coming, but Derek Morrison had just become the most dangerous enemy they'd ever made. Chapter 2. Unraveling the Deception. Derek left the police station with Rodriguez's assurance that Mason would be cared for while he made arrangements. But Derek wasn't arranging childcare. He was planning war. His first stop was his office, where he pulled every resource at his disposal. As a criminal defense attorney with connections throughout the city's legal system, Derek had access to investigators, databases, and information networks that most people could only dream of. He started with a simple background check on Troy Castellano. Within an hour, the picture became clearer. Troy had moved back to town exactly 3 years and 2 months ago, right around the time Mason would have been conceived. He'd taken a job as a construction supervisor, the kind of blue-collar work that Lindsay had always claimed to look down on. But the real revelation came when Derek's private investigator, Rita Kowalski, delivered her preliminary report. "Derek, you're not going to like this," Rita said, sliding a folder across his mahogany desk. "I ran surveillance footage from that park where the kid was found. Your wife and Castellano have been meeting there regularly for months. And get this, they've got a whole setup. Apartment lease under both their names across town. The kid's been living there." Derek's knuckles whitened as he gripped the desk edge. "Show me." Rita opened her laptop, pulling up surveillance footage from various locations around the city. There was Lindsay, his wife of 8 years, kissing Troy Castellano outside a coffee shop. There she was again, holding Mason's hand as they walked into an apartment complex Derek had never seen before. "The apartment's been leased for 2 years, Rita continued. "Looks like they've been playing house while you've been paying for the real house. Your wife's been living a double life, Derek. She's got a whole other family." Derek studied the photos with the same methodical attention he used when examining evidence for capital murder cases. But this wasn't about defending someone else. This was about destroying the people who'd made him a fool. "I want everything, Rita. Financial records, phone logs, social media, employment history. And I want to know everyone who knew about this and kept quiet." "Derek," Rita said carefully, "what are you planning?" Derek leaned back in his leather chair, the same one where he'd planned defense strategies that had freed killers and destroyed prosecutors' careers. "I'm planning justice, Rita, the kind that actually works." Over the next few hours, Derek's network of contacts revealed the full scope of the betrayal. Lindsay's sister knew about Mason. So did her mother. Even their next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had been covering for Lindsay's absences. But the most devastating discovery came when Derek reviewed their joint bank account records. Lindsay hadn't just been cheating. She'd been funding her second life with his money. Thousands of dollars in withdrawals that she'd claimed were for client entertainment and professional development had actually been going toward the apartment, furniture, and supporting Mason. Derek had been working himself to exhaustion to pay for his wife's affair. As evening approached, Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Lindsay. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. Love you." The words made his stomach turn. Derek typed back, "Miss you too. See you tomorrow." Then he called Detective Rodriguez. "I've arranged for temporary custody of Mason. I'll pick him up in the morning and take him home." "What about the mother?" "She's been informed," Derek lied smoothly. "She's dealing with a family emergency out of state. I'll be Mason's primary caretaker for now." Derek Morrison had spent his career in courtrooms where one mistake could mean the difference between freedom and life in prison. He'd learned that victory went to whoever planned most carefully and struck most ruthlessly. Lindsay and Troy thought they were clever. They thought they'd outsmarted him. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. As Derek locked his office and headed home to his empty house, he was already 3 moves ahead. Tomorrow, Mason would come home to meet the father he'd been kept from, and Lindsay would walk into a trap that would destroy everything she thought she'd built. Derek Morrison never lost a case when he had the evidence on his side. And now, he had all the evidence he needed. Chapter 3, The Father's Return. The next morning, Derek picked up Mason from the temporary child services facility where he'd spent the night. The 3-year-old was clutching the same toy car, his eyes wide as Derek buckled him into a car seat he'd purchased an hour earlier. "Are we going to see Mommy?" Mason asked as they drove through the city. "Soon," Derek said, his voice gentle despite the fury burning in his chest. "First, I want to show you your real home." Derek had spent the early morning hours transforming the guest bedroom into a child's room. He'd hired a service to deliver furniture, toys, and everything a 3-year-old might need. When they arrived at the house, Mason's face lit up with wonder. "This is all mine?" Mason asked, running his small hands over a wooden train set. "Yes, son. This is where you belong." Derek knelt down to Mason's level, studying the boy's face. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same jawline, the same stubborn cowlick, the same way of tilting his head when curious. This was his child, kept from him for 3 years by the woman he trusted most. Mason, I need to ask you something important. At your other house, the one with Mommy and Uncle Troy, did they tell you not to talk about me? Mason nodded solemnly. Mommy said you were very busy and couldn't visit. She said it made you sad to talk about me. So was our secret. Derek's hands clenched into fists. Lindsay had poisoned his own son against him, made the boy believe his father didn't want him. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. That's not true, Mason. I wanted to know you your whole life. And now I'm going to make sure nothing separates us again. Derek spent the morning with Mason, learning about his son's favorite foods, his fear of thunderstorms, his love of construction trucks, probably influenced by Troy's job. Every detail carved another mark in Derek's mental tally of what Lindsay and Troy had stolen from him. At noon, Derek's phone rang. Lindsay's name appeared on the screen. Derek, I just got the strangest call from the police. They said something about Mason being found, but that's impossible. He's right here with. Lindsay's voice trailed off, and Derek could practically hear the moment reality crash down on her. Hello, Lindsay. Derek's voice was ice cold. I think we need to talk. Derek, I can explain. No. Derek cut her off. You can't. There's no explanation for keeping my son from me for 3 years. There's no explanation for the lies, the deception, the betrayal. Where's Mason? Is he safe? Mason is exactly where he should be, with his father, in his real home. Derek could hear Lindsay's panicked breathing. Derek, please. You don't understand the situation. It's complicated. It's really not complicated at all. You've been living a double life, playing house with Troy Castellano while I paid for everything. You've been stealing from our joint accounts to fund your little fantasy. And worst of all, you've been keeping my son from me. Derek, listen to me. No, Lindsay, you listen to me. Derek's voice dropped to the deadly calm tone he used when cross-examining witnesses he was about to destroy. I know about the apartment. I know about the bank withdrawals. I know about everyone who helped you lie to me. And now I'm going to show you exactly what happens to people who betray Derek Morrison. Derek, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. You should have been scared the moment you decided to steal my child and my life. Derek hung up the phone and turned to see Mason playing happily with his new toys. His son was safe now, but Derek's work was far from finished. He opened his laptop and began composing the first phase of his revenge. By the time he was done, Lindsay and Troy wouldn't just lose each other. They'd lose everything. Derek Morrison had spent 23 years learning how to destroy people legally and thoroughly. He'd ruined prosecutors, discredited witnesses, and torn apart cases that seemed airtight. Now, he was going to use those skills on a much more personal target. Lindsay and Troy had taken 3 years of his son's life. Derek was going to take everything from them in return. And unlike his son, they would never get any of it back. Chapter 4. Setting the Trap. Derek spent the weekend with Mason, learning his son's routines and building the foundation of a relationship that should have existed from birth. But even as he read bedtime stories and pushed Mason on the playground swings, Derek's mind was orchestrating the systematic destruction of the two people who'd stolen these moments from him. Monday morning brought the first phase of his plan into action. Derek's law firm, Morrison & Associates, occupied 3 floors of downtown's most prestigious office building. His connections reached into every level of city government, law enforcement, and the business community. Over his career, he'd collected favors from judges, prosecutors, police commanders, and city officials. Now it was time to call them in. His first call was to District Attorney Patricia Vega, a woman whose career Derek had helped salvage 5 years earlier when corruption charges had threatened to destroy her. Patricia, I need a favor, Derek said, settling into his office chair as Mason played quietly in the corner with building blocks. Name it, Derek. After what you did for me, I owe you. I need you to look into a construction company called Castellano Contracting. Specifically, their safety compliance and worker documentation. I have reason to believe they're cutting corners. Derek had spent Sunday night researching Troy's business. The man ran a small construction crew that specialized in residential remodeling. From what Derek's investigator had uncovered, Troy's operation was typical of many small contractors, operating in the gray areas of regulations, cutting corners to underbid competitors. "I'll have inspectors out there this week," Patricia promised. "Anything specific I should know?" "Just be thorough." "Very thorough." Derek's second call was to his contact at the city's housing authority. Then came calls to the health department, the labor board, and the immigration enforcement office. By lunchtime, Derek had set in motion a web of official scrutiny that would crush Troy's business from 6 different directions. But Troy was just the opening move. For Lindsay, Derek had something far more personal planned. Derek's third call was to Monica Torres, the top real estate broker in the city and Lindsay's biggest competitor. Monica had been trying to poach Lindsay's biggest clients for years. "Monica, it's Derek Morrison. I have a business proposition for you." "Derek, how's the family?" The irony of the question almost made Derek laugh. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. Lindsay and I are having some marital difficulties. I'm concerned about the ethics of her business practices. I think you should know that she's been using our joint accounts to fund personal expenses while claiming they were business costs." That's serious, Derek. It gets worse. I've discovered she's been lying to clients about her availability and qualifications. She's been running a side business that's creating conflicts of interest with her main job at Premier Properties." Derek spent 20 minutes feeding Monica carefully crafted half-truths that would plant seeds of doubt about Lindsay's professional integrity. He knew Monica would spread the information through the real estate community within days. The final call of the day was to Derek's banker, Robert Shun, at First National. "Robert, I need to restructure some accounts. I've discovered some unauthorized use of our joint funds, and I need to protect my assets while we sort things out." "Of course, Derek. Identity theft is becoming so common these days." Derek didn't correct the assumption. Within an hour, he'd moved all their liquid assets into accounts that only he controlled. Lindsay's credit cards were quietly canceled, her access to their investment accounts frozen. By Tuesday morning, the first phase of Derek's plan was already bearing fruit. Troy's construction sites were swarmed by city inspectors who found exactly what Derek had suspected they'd find: safety violations, improper permits, and undocumented workers. 3 jobs were shut down immediately, and Troy faced fines that would cripple his business. Lindsay discovered her financial situation when her credit card was declined at a client lunch. When she called the bank, she was told the account had been closed due to suspected fraudulent activity. Derek's phone rang as he was feeding Mason lunch. "Derek, what the hell is going on?" Lindsay's voice was tight with panic. "My cards aren't working, and Troy says the city shut down all his jobs. This can't be a coincidence. I told you there would be consequences," Derek said calmly, cutting Mason's sandwich into triangles. "This is just the beginning. You can't do this. I have rights. So did I. The right to know my son. The right to know my wife wasn't stealing from me. The right to know she wasn't living a double life." Derek's voice remained perfectly calm, which made it more terrifying. "You took away my rights for 3 years. Now I'm taking away yours. Derek, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can—" "No, Lindsay, we can't. You made your choice when you decided to steal my son and my money to play house with another man. Now you get to live with the consequences." Derek hung up and turned his attention back to Mason, who was arranging his sandwich pieces into the shape of a house. "Daddy, will Mommy come visit soon?" Derek looked at his son's hopeful face and felt his resolve harden even further. Mason deserved better than the lies and deception that had defined his first 3 years. "Soon, son. But first, Daddy has some work to finish." Derek Morrison was just getting started. Phase 1 had been about destabilizing his enemies. Phase 2 would be about destroying them completely. And Derek had never lost a case he was determined to win. Chapter 5: The Net Titans. By Wednesday, Derek's carefully orchestrated campaign was gaining momentum like an avalanche. He watched from his office as the city's bureaucratic machinery ground Lindsay and Troy's lives into dust. Each phone call, an inspection, triggering the next level of scrutiny. Troy's situation was deteriorating rapidly. The construction company that had been his pride and livelihood was hemorrhaging money. City inspectors had found asbestos in 3 of his renovation projects, leading to costly remediation requirements. The labor board had discovered payroll violations that carried hefty fines. Most damaging of all, an immigration audit had revealed that several of his workers lacked proper documentation. Derek's investigator Rita provided regular updates. Troy's trying to liquidate assets to pay the fines, but it's not enough. Word's getting around the construction community that his company is toxic. No one wants to partner with him on new projects. And Lindsay, she's in full panic mode. Her boss at Premier Properties called her in for a meeting yesterday. Apparently, Monica Torres has been spreading rumors about her professional conduct. 3 of her biggest clients have requested new agents. Derek allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. But Derek wasn't finished. The next phase would hit closer to home. Derek had spent Tuesday evening carefully reviewing all the legal documents in his household. What he found was a goldmine of leverage. The house was titled solely in his name, purchased before their marriage. The cars were in his name. Even Lindsay's engagement ring had been insured under his policy. More importantly, Derek had discovered that Lindsay had been forging his signature on several financial documents related to her real estate career. She'd used his credentials as a lawyer to enhance her credibility with high-end clients, signing documents that required his approval without ever asking for it. That was a felony. Wednesday afternoon, Derek made another call to DA Patricia Vega. Patricia, I need to report crime. I've discovered my wife has been forging my signature on legal documents. I have copies of everything. Derek, I'm sorry to hear about your personal troubles. Are you sure you want to pursue criminal charges? This could get very messy very quickly. I'm absolutely certain. She's committed fraud, and she needs to face the consequences. Within hours, a warrant was issued for Lindsay's arrest on charges of forgery and fraud. Derek made sure he was the one to deliver the news. Lindsay, the police will probably contact you soon about some financial irregularities they've discovered. I thought you should know. What are you talking about? Her voice was strained. Derek could hear the exhaustion that came from 3 days of watching her world collapse. The forged signatures on the Morrison Trust documents. The fraudulent use of my credentials with your clients. It's all there in black and white. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Derek, I only did that to help our family. To build our future. Our family? Lindsay, you were building a future with another man using my son and my money. That's not family. That's theft. Please, Derek, I know I made mistakes, but this is going too far. Troy's business is ruined. I might lose my job. And now criminal charges. Derek looked across his office to where Mason was napping on the couch, exhausted from a morning at the zoo. His son looked peaceful in a way that Derek had never seen in the brief glimpses he'd caught at the police station. You had 3 years to think about consequences, Lindsay. 3 years while you were stealing my son's childhood from both of us. This is what justice looks like. Justice? Derek, this is revenge. Yes, Derek said quietly. It is, and I'm very good at revenge. That evening, Derek received a call from Rita with news that made his day complete. Derek, you're going to love this. Troy showed up at Lindsay's real job today, screaming about how everything was her fault. Made a huge scene in front of clients and management. Security had to escort him out. And Lindsay's boss fired her on the spot. So they couldn't have that kind of drama associated with their company. Her real estate license is under review by the state board because of the forgery charges. Derek felt a deep sense of satisfaction settle over him. Lindsay and Troy were turning on each other, exactly as he'd predicted. When people were desperate and cornered, they always blamed their accomplices first. There's more, Rita continued. Troy's landlord evicted him from the construction office. Turns out the lease was in both his and Lindsay's names, and the landlord wants nothing to do with the legal troubles. Troy's living out of his truck. What about the apartment where they were keeping Mason? Abandoned. Landlord's going after them for 3 months back rent. Apparently, they stopped paying when the money got tight. Derek hung up the phone and walked over to check on Mason, who was stirring from his nap. His son's eyes opened, immediately searching for Derek's face. Daddy? Where are we? We're home, son. We're safe at home. Derek had torn down his enemies' lives piece by piece, using the same methodical precision he brought to his legal work. But he wasn't finished yet. The final phase would ensure that Lindsay and Troy never had the chance to hurt anyone else the way they'd hurt him. Derek Morrison had built his career on the principle that justice was about more than punishment. It was about ensuring that dangerous people could never repeat their crimes. Tomorrow, he would make sure Lindsay and Troy would never be able to rebuild what he destroyed. Chapter 6: Scorched Earth. Thursday morning brought news that Derek had been anticipating with grim satisfaction. Lindsay had been arrested at her sister's house, where she'd been staying since being evicted from her apartment with Troy. The charges included forgery, fraud, and embezzlement, the financial crimes Derek had carefully documented through his investigation. Derek watched the news coverage from his office while Mason played with educational tablets Derek had purchased. The report was brief but damaging. Local real estate agent arrested on fraud charges, accused of using forged documents to defraud clients. The phone rang almost immediately. It was Lindsay's lawyer, Amanda Foster, a competent attorney, but nowhere near Derek's league. "Derek, we need to talk. This has gone far enough." "Has it?" "I don't think so, Amanda. Your client committed multiple felonies while stealing my son from me. If anything, this hasn't gone nearly far enough. She's willing to negotiate a custody arrangement. Supervised visitation, shared holidays." Derek's laugh was cold and sharp. "Supervised visitation? Amanda, your client kept my son's secret from me for 3 years while she played house with her boyfriend. She's facing federal fraud charges. She has no job, no income, and no stable housing. What exactly does she think she's negotiating with?" "Derek, she's still Mason's mother. She's a criminal who used my son as a pawn in her affair. Mason deserves better." Derek's legal strategy was simple and brutal. He'd filed for emergency custody based on Lindsay's criminal charges and her demonstrated pattern of deception. With her arrest record, financial instability, and the evidence of her lies, no judge would grant her anything more than supervised visits, if that. But Derek had bigger plans than just winning custody. Derek's next call was to his contact at the State Real Estate Licensing Board. "Tom, it's Derek Morrison. I wanted to follow up on the complaint I filed against Lindsay Morrison." "Derek, I'm sorry about your personal situation. We're reviewing her license based on the fraud charges, but these things take time." "I understand, but there's additional evidence you should see. My investigator has documented a pattern of ethical violations going back 2 years. Conflicts of interest, client confidentiality breaches, misuse of trust accounts." Derek had Rita compile every questionable transaction in Lindsay's career, every corner cut, every rule bent. Individually, they might have resulted in warnings or small fines. Together, they painted a picture of systematic professional misconduct. "I'll have our investigators review everything you send over," Tom promised. Derek's campaign wasn't just about punishment. It was about permanent destruction. He wanted to ensure that Lindsay could never again work in real estate, never again have the financial independence to challenge him for custody, never again have the means to disrupt Mason's life. Friday brought the news Derek had been waiting for. Troy Castellano had been arrested on charges related to his construction business, tax evasion, labor violations, and using undocumented workers. The charges carried potential federal prison time. But more importantly, Troy had been picked up at a bar where he'd been drinking heavily and talking loudly about his troubles. According to the police report Rita obtained, Troy had been telling anyone who would listen that the whole thing was Lindsay's idea and that she'd trapped him into the relationship. Derek smiled as he read the report. Troy was doing exactly what Derek had predicted, protecting himself by throwing Lindsay under the bus. Derek's phone rang. It was Amanda Foster again. "Derek, my client wants to meet with you. Face to face. She says there are things about Mason's paternity that you need to know." Derek's blood ran cold. "What kind of things?" "She won't tell me. She insists on speaking with you directly." Derek considered the request. It could be a trap, or it could be Lindsay's last desperate attempt to gain leverage. Either way, Derek was confident in his position. "Fine. Saturday afternoon. My office." "And Amanda? Make sure she understands that this meeting changes nothing. The criminal charges stand. The custody filing stands. This is her one chance to say whatever she thinks needs saying." Saturday arrived gray and cold, matching Derek's mood as he prepared for what he knew would be his final confrontation with a woman who'd stolen 3 years of his son's life. Derek had Mason staying with his parents for the weekend. He didn't want his son anywhere near the ugliness that was about to unfold. As Derek waited in his office, reviewing the devastating case file he'd built against Lindsay and Troy, he felt the satisfaction of a job well done. Both of his enemies were facing criminal charges that would destroy their futures. Lindsay had lost her career, her income, and any hope of gaining custody of Mason. Troy's business was in ruins, and he was facing federal prison time. Derek Morrison had done what he'd promised. He made them pay for their betrayal. But as Derek reviewed his work, a small part of him wondered what Lindsay was so desperate to tell him. What could she possibly say that would matter now? In a few hours, Derek would have his answer. And then, finally, this chapter of his life would be closed forever. The only question was whether Lindsay's final revelation would change anything, or if Derek would simply add it to the pile of evidence he'd used to bury her for good. Chapter 7. The Final Revelation. Saturday afternoon brought a cold rain that matched the atmosphere in Derek's office as he waited for Lindsay and her lawyer to arrive. Derek had spent the morning reviewing every detail of his campaign against his wife and her lover, ensuring that no loose ends remained. Troy was in county jail awaiting trial on federal charges. His construction business was permanently destroyed, his assets seized to pay fines and back taxes. He'd already indicated through his public defender that he was willing to testify against Lindsay in exchange for a reduced sentence. Lindsay's situation was equally dire. Her real estate license had been permanently revoked. The fraud charges carried a potential 5-year prison sentence. She had no income, no assets, and no place to live. Derek had won completely, but something about this emergency meeting nagged at him. At precisely 2 p.m., Amanda Foster arrived with Lindsay. Derek's wife looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past week. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Derek," Lindsay said quietly as she took the seat across from his desk. "Lindsay." Derek's voice was cold and professional. "Amanda said you had something important to tell me. Let's get this over with." Lindsay glanced at her lawyer, then back at Derek. "It's about Mason's paternity." Derek felt his stomach clench. "What about it?" "Derek, I need you to understand something. The timing of when I got pregnant, it doesn't match what you think." "What are you talking about?" Lindsay took a shaky breath. "Mason isn't Troy's son. He's yours. He's always been yours." Derek stared at her, his mind reeling. "That's impossible. You said you weren't ready for children. We were careful. We were usually careful. But there was that weekend when you came back early from the Henderson trial. Remember? You've been gone for 3 weeks, and we—" Lindsay's voice trailed off. Derek remembered. He'd won a major case in Los Angeles and had flown home a day early to surprise Lindsay. They'd had a passionate reunion that night. "You're lying," Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm not lying, Derek. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks later. I was terrified. We've been fighting about having children, and I knew you'd think I'd done it on purpose to trap you. So you decided to hide the pregnancy instead? I was going to tell you, but then Troy moved back to town, and we started talking again. He was going through his divorce, and he was lonely. We started spending time together, and one thing led to another." Derek's mind was racing, trying to process this new information. "You had an affair because you were pregnant with my child?" "I was scared, Derek. Scared of how you'd react. Scared of becoming a mother. Scared of everything changing. Troy offered me an escape. He said he'd help raise the baby, that we could build a life together." Amanda Foster looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "Lindsay, maybe we should—" "No," Lindsay said firmly. "Derek needs to know the truth. Mason is your son, Derek. Biologically, completely, utterly yours. Troy never believed otherwise, but he was willing to pretend for my sake." Derek stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the city where he'd systematically destroyed 2 lives over the past week. "You're telling me that I spent the last week destroying a man who was helping to raise my own son?" "Yes. And you let me believe that Troy was Mason's father? I never said that explicitly. You assumed it when Mason called him Uncle Troy. Derek turned back to face his wife, and Lindsay flinched at the fury in his eyes. You let me believe that I was fighting for a son who belonged to another man. You let me think that my child was the product of your affair. Derek, you destroyed an innocent man because you were too cowardly to tell me the truth 3 years ago. The weight of what Derek had done was crushing down on him. Troy Castellano wasn't a villain who'd stolen Derek's wife and child. He was a man who'd been willing to help raise another man's son because he loved Lindsay. Derek had used all his legal expertise and personal connections to destroy an innocent man's life. Derek, Lindsay said quietly, Troy knows the truth. He's always known. He was protecting me and Mason because he thought it was the right thing to do. Derek's hands were shaking with rage. Do you have any idea what I've done to him? I know. And Derek, I know you can fix it. Derek stared at her in disbelief. Fix it? Lindsay, the man, is in federal prison. His business is destroyed. His reputation is ruined. His life is over. You have connections. You have influence. You can make the charges disappear, help him rebuild. Are you insane? Derek's voice rose to a shout. You think I can just wave a magic wand and undo a week of systematic destruction? You did it to destroy him. You can do it to save him. Derek realized with stunning clarity that even now, even after everything, Lindsay was trying to manipulate him. She wasn't confessing out of guilt. She was trying to save Troy. You still love him, Derek said quietly. Yes, Lindsay admitted. I do. And Derek, despite everything you've done to him, he still loves me. He still wants to be part of Mason's life. Derek sat back down, his mind working furiously. Lindsay was asking him to use his power and connections to rebuild the life of the man she loved. The man she'd chosen over Derek, even though Mason was Derek's son. Let me understand this, Derek said slowly. You want me to help Troy so that you can continue your relationship with him while I raise my son? Derek, we could work out some kind of arrangement. Shared custody, co-parenting. Derek's laugh was bitter and cold. Shared custody? With a woman facing federal fraud charges and her boyfriend whose life I've destroyed? If you help Troy, the charges against me could disappear too. You have that power. Derek stared at his wife, finally seeing her with perfect clarity. She wasn't remorseful. She wasn't sorry. She was still scheming, still manipulating, still trying to find a way to win. No, Derek said quietly. Derek, please. Think about what's best for Mason. I am thinking about what's best for Mason. And what's best for him is never seeing either of you again. Derek had been prepared to feel guilty about destroying Troy if the man had been innocent. But Troy wasn't innocent. He'd been part of Lindsay's deception from the beginning. He'd helped keep Derek from his son for 3 years. Maybe Troy wasn't Mason's biological father, but he'd still stolen 3 years of Derek's life with his son. And Lindsay? She was still lying, still manipulating, still trying to use Derek's love for Mason to get what she wanted. Derek Morrison had built his career on reading people, on understanding their motivations and weaknesses. He thought he was destroying evil people who'd betrayed him. Now he realized he'd been right all along. The biology didn't matter. The betrayal was real. The theft of his son's childhood was real. The lies and manipulation were real. Troy and Lindsay had both chosen to participate in keeping Derek from his son. They'd both chosen to steal 3 years of his life. And Derek Morrison never forgave betrayal. Get out of my office, Derek said quietly. Derek, please. Get out. And Lindsay? This changes nothing. Mason is my son, and he's never seeing either of you again. You made your choice 3 years ago. Now live with it. As Lindsay and her lawyer left, Derek stood at his window, looking out at the city where he'd destroyed 2 lives with surgical precision. He thought he might feel guilty if Troy turned out to be innocent. Instead, Derek felt nothing but satisfaction. Biology was irrelevant. Trevor had still chosen to help steal Derek's son from him. Lindsay had still lied and manipulated and betrayed everything Derek had trusted her with. They'd both pay the price for their choices. Forever. Chapter 8. The Price of Betrayal. Monday morning brought the final pieces of Derek's revenge into place with devastating efficiency. The revelation about Mason's paternity hadn't changed Derek's resolve. If anything, it had crystallized his understanding that both Lindsay and Troy deserved everything that was happening to them. Derek's first call was to his contact at the district attorney's office. "Patricia, I wanted to update you on the Morrison case. My wife has admitted that the fraud was more extensive than we initially believed. She's been using my credentials and connections to legitimize her boyfriend's business dealings as well." Derek had spent Sunday night crafting a new narrative that would ensure both Lindsay and Troy faced the maximum possible penalties. The beauty was that most of it was technically true. Troy had benefited from Lindsay's access to Derek's resources and contacts. "Derek, are you sure you want to pursue this aggressively? Once we file federal charges, there's no going back." "I'm certain. My son deserves to know that justice was served." Within hours, additional federal charges were filed against both Lindsay and Troy. Conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, and tax evasion. The charges carried a minimum sentence of 15 years in federal prison. Derek's second call was to the family court judge handling his custody case. "Your Honor, I wanted to inform you that new evidence has come to light regarding the other party's character and fitness as a parent." Judge Harrison was an old friend of Derek's from law school. "What kind of evidence, Derek?" "She's now facing federal racketeering charges. The FBI is investigating her for running a criminal enterprise with her boyfriend. I have documented evidence that she used my son as leverage in her criminal activities, moving him between safe houses to avoid detection." Derek was stretching the truth, but the apartment where Lindsay had been hiding Mason could easily be characterized as a safe house in the context of a fraud investigation. "Derek, given the circumstances, I'm prepared to grant you sole custody with no visitation rights for the mother pending the outcome of her criminal trial." "Thank you, Your Honor. That's exactly what I was hoping for." Derek's final call was to Rita, his investigator. "Rita, I need you to reach out to your contacts in the federal prison system. I want to make sure that when Lindsay and Troy are sentenced, they end up in facilities that are appropriate for their crimes." "Derek, what are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to ensure that their accommodations reflect the severity of their betrayal. People who steal children and defraud families deserve to be housed with other serious criminals." Rita was quiet for a moment. "Derek, you know I'll do whatever you need. But are you sure about this? Once they're in the federal system, there's no protection for them." Derek thought about Mason, playing happily in his office with the train set Derek had bought him. His son had adapted to his new life with remarkable resilience, as if he'd always belonged in Derek's home. "I'm absolutely certain. They made their choices. Now they live with the consequences." Wednesday brought news that filled Derek with satisfaction. Troy had been denied bail and was being held in federal custody pending trial. His public defender had indicated that Troy was willing to testify against Lindsay in exchange for a reduced sentence, but the prosecution wasn't interested in a deal. Lindsay's situation was even worse. The federal prosecutors had offered her a plea bargain: plead guilty to all charges and receive 25 years in federal prison, or go to trial and face life imprisonment if convicted. Derek's phone rang that afternoon. It was Amanda Foster. "Derek, I need to ask you something directly. Is there any way you'd consider asking the prosecutors to offer my client a more reasonable plea deal?" "What kind of deal are you thinking about, Amanda?" 5 years, with eligibility for parole in 3. She'd sign away all parental rights to Mason. Derek pretended to consider the offer. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Amanda. The prosecutors have made it clear that this case is about more than just fraud. It's about protecting families from predators who would steal children and destroy lives for their own gain." "Derek, she's the mother of your child." "No, Amanda. She's a criminal who happened to give birth to my son. There's a difference." "Derek, please. She's talking about taking this to trial. If she does, everything will come out in court. Every detail of your marriage, your relationship with Mason, everything." Derek's smile was cold. "Let her try. I have 23 years of experience destroying people in courtrooms. If Lindsay wants a trial, she'll get one. And when it's over, she'll wish she'd taken the plea deal." Thursday brought the final piece of Derek's puzzle into place. Troy had been attacked in federal custody by inmates who'd learned about his charges related to child exploitation. Derek had made sure the information reached the right ears through his prison contacts. Troy was now in protective custody, which meant 23-hour-a-day isolation for the rest of his sentence. When his public defender called Derek's office asking if there was anything Derek could do to help, Derek's response was simple. Mr. Castellano participated in keeping my son from me for 3 years. He's exactly where he deserves to be. Friday afternoon, Derek was reading to Mason when his phone rang one final time. It was Lindsay calling from county jail. Derek, I'll take the plea deal. 25 years. I'll sign away my rights to Mason. Just please, make them transfer Troy to a safer facility. Derek set down the children's book and looked at his son, who was building elaborate structures with his blocks. No, Derek said quietly. Derek, please. He could die in there. That's not my problem, Lindsay. You both chose to steal my son from me. You both chose to lie and deceive and manipulate. Now you both get to live with the consequences. Derek, I'm begging you. You had 3 years to think about consequences. 3 years while you were keeping my son's secret from me. This is what justice looks like. Derek hung up the phone and turned his attention back to Mason. Daddy, will you teach me to build a courthouse like yours? Derek smiled at his son, who would grow up knowing that his father was a man who never accepted betrayal, never forgave deception, and never let anyone steal what belonged to him. Of course, son. And I'll teach you about justice too. About how important it is to make sure bad people can't hurt good people. Derek Morrison had kept his promise. He'd made Lindsay and Troy pay for their betrayal. They would spend the rest of their lives in federal prison, never again able to hurt anyone else the way they'd hurt him. And Mason would grow up knowing that his father was a man who protected what mattered most. Derek had won completely, and he'd sleep while knowing that justice had been served. Chapter 9. The Ruthless Father's Victory. 5 years later, Derek Morrison stood in the same office where he'd first learned about his son's existence. But everything had changed. The walls now displayed Mason's artwork alongside Derek's legal awards. Family photos showed father and son at baseball games, camping trips, and school events. 5 years of memories that Derek had refused to let anyone steal from him again. Mason, now 8 years old, was completing his homework at the small desk Derek had installed in the corner of his office. The boy had grown into a confident, intelligent child who excelled in school and showed early signs of inheriting his father's analytical mind. Dad, Tommy's mom wants to know if you can help with her divorce case, Mason said, looking up from his math homework. Derek smiled at his son. Over the years, Mason had completely adapted to his new life. He rarely asked about his mother anymore, and Derek had carefully crafted a narrative that painted Lindsay as someone who'd made bad choices and couldn't be part of their lives anymore. I'll think about it, son. Finish your homework first. Derek's life had settled into a routine of work and parenting that brought him deep satisfaction. He'd hired a nanny to help with Mason's care, but Derek insisted on being present for every important moment. He coached Mason's Little League team, attended every school play, and made sure his son never felt abandoned again. The phone rang, interrupting Derek's thoughts. It was Rita, his investigator, with her monthly update on Lindsay and Troy's situations. Derek, thought you want to know. Lindsay's appeal was denied again. She's looking at the full 25 years with no possibility of early release. And Troy, still in protective custody. He's developed some kind of mental health issue from the isolation. His lawyer keeps filing motions for transfer to a psychiatric facility, but they keep getting denied. Derek felt the familiar satisfaction that came with knowing his enemies were still paying for their crimes. Over the past 5 years, both Lindsay and Troy had tried repeatedly to reduce their sentences or improve their conditions. Every appeal had been denied, every motion dismissed. Derek's connections and influence ensured that their suffering continued exactly as he'd planned. Rita, I want you to keep monitoring their situations. If either of them ever gets close to early release or transfer, I want to know immediately. Of course, Derek. But honestly, neither of them is going anywhere anytime soon. Troy's mental state is deteriorating rapidly, and Lindsay's legal options are exhausted. Derek hung up and returned his attention to Mason, who was struggling with a particularly difficult math problem. Dad, can you help me with this one? Derek knelt beside his son's desk, patiently explaining the problem. These are the moments Derek treasured most, the quiet father-son interactions that Lindsay and Troy had stolen from him for 3 years. That evening, as Derek tucked Mason into bed, his son looked up at him with the same blue eyes Derek saw in the mirror every morning. "Dad, do you ever think about getting married again?" Derek considered the question carefully. Over the years, several women had shown interest in him. Attractive, successful women who would have made suitable stepmother for Mason. But Derek had never seriously considered remarrying. "Why do you ask, son?" "Some of the kids at school have stepmoms. I just wondered if you ever got lonely." Derek sat on the edge of Mason's bed, choosing his words carefully. "Son, some people in this world can be trusted, and some can't. I learned that lesson the hard way. The most important thing is that you and I trust each other completely. I trust you, Dad. And I trust you. That's all we need." As Derek turned off Mason's bedroom light and headed downstairs to his study, he reflected on the path his life had taken. 5 years ago, he'd been a successful lawyer with a lying wife and a secret son. Today, he was a single father who'd built an unbreakable bond with his child while ensuring that the people who'd betrayed them both paid the ultimate price. Derek opened his laptop and reviewed the financial reports from his law firm. Business had never been better. His reputation for ruthlessness had actually enhanced his career. Clients knew that Derek Morrison would stop at nothing to protect their interests. The phone rang one final time. It was the warden at the federal facility where Lindsay was serving her sentence. "Mr. Morrison, I wanted to inform you that inmate Morrison has requested permission to send a letter to her son. Per your instructions, we've denied the request, but I wanted you to know. Thank you for following protocol. Has she made any other requests? She's asking for permission to make a phone call to you. Something about important information regarding your son's welfare." Derek's expression hardened. Even after 5 years in federal prison, Lindsay was still trying to manipulate situations to her advantage. "Denied. And warden, I want you to make it clear to inmate Morrison that any further attempts to contact my son or myself will result in additional charges for harassment and violation of court orders." "Understood, Mr. Morrison." Derek hung up and walked to the window of his study, looking out at the city where he'd systematically destroyed 2 lives with surgical precision. Somewhere out there, in federal facilities hundreds of miles apart, Lindsay and Troy were spending another night paying for their betrayal. Derek had kept his promise. He'd made them pay for stealing his son from him. They would never be free to hurt anyone else the way they'd hurt him. And Mason would grow up knowing that his father was a man who protected what mattered most, no matter the cost. Derek Morrison poured himself a glass of whiskey and settled into his leather chair. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new clients, new cases to win. But tonight, he could rest knowing that justice had been served completely and permanently. His son was safe. His enemies were destroyed. His victory was absolute. Derek Morrison had never lost a case he was determined to win, and he'd won the most important case of his life. In the end, Derek Morrison had proven that betrayal came with a price that could never be fully paid. Lindsay and Troy would spend the rest of their lives in federal prison, while Derek raised his son with the unshakable knowledge that some sins could never be forgiven. Mason would grow up understanding that loyalty was everything and that his father was a man who would move heaven and earth to protect those he loved and destroy those who dared to betray him. Derek Morrison never forgave. He never forgot, and he never lost. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.